Well, the last time we talked to Greg Bride, he explained the journey that he took to get to the Avon Theatre. This time, we're going to talk about some of the productions that Greg has been involved with recently, and some of his favorite aspects of those shows. This is part 2 of our Resource Stage conversation with Greg Bride, head electrician at the Avon Theatre, Stratford, Ontario. So, Greg, we've been talking a little bit about how you got to where you are and what you've been doing up to this point, and we were starting to talk about your team, and we were talking about how you've put this together, but also we've been talking about how the need for more people and a more diverse group of people. So, can you tell me a little bit about how things have changed and kind of how you've dealt with that, and then maybe highlight a couple of things that have been interesting along the way, maybe some shows that you've worked on that are interesting, that kind of thing.
When I first started in the position, we had the console was an Avon Safari system,
Right.
and there was myself and there was one other guy in the department, and he was the right-hand man, and basically we were to do all the shows.
Right.
And so if I was on the console or Marty was on the console.
Right.
So that was then.
Right.
Now we've moved over to a platform, and we're on the EOS platform.
Right.
Now we've really branched into every show has at minimum of 2 programmers. And I say minimum of 2 programmers because let's take Neverending Story as an example.
Okay.
When just so I can spell it out, if we're going to do media and we're going to do moving lights, and we're going to do something that's unique to a show, that show had something highly unique in it. We had a pixel map on the floor, right, where the actors could get their spikes from. Well, that required 3 programmers all the time. Right.
So can we stop there for a second just to explain? So the entire floor of the Avon Theatre stage had LED positions on stage, and that was your spike positions, where traditionally the stagehands would use tape to mark where things would go on stage. Yep. So, you're going to move that table onto the stage and put it here, and then the chair goes here, that kind of thing. And you guys said, this is way more complicated this season, or for this show, we have to do this differently. So you did...
The design concept was, we don't want to see those. We want it to be magic. And originally they said, well, we could just use little tiny, I think Jill's... It was a great moment. She said, just pokes it through the foam. And we said, well, we can do a little better than that. And so we started to show them, we can just poke them through the wood. But what about if we had control over all the colors and any color you wanted? And we're going to fall down a rabbit hole here, Carl, but why not?
Wouldn't be the first time we did.
And so then Drew speaking of rabbit holes, said, oh, yeah, I can make a color palette with those. And I said, okay, well, let's have a color palette for every actor. And the crew has a color palette. Right. And so then every performer had their own color palette. So then anywhere you stood on the stage, you could see that, because they were on our scene shop. I have to give them the credit. They made the angle just right. So you couldn't really see them from the audience, but you could see them really clear as a bell from backstage. And so then anywhere on the stage, you could see those spikes really well, right, but the audience couldn't see them.
Right. So you've got the stage that's got a grid work of LED that are RGB LEDs, red, green, blue for color mixing. And then every single one of those you can light up wherever you need it to be. So how many channels is that?
It was a lot. Yeah.
But and just to be clear, that's a lot of channels.
Yeah, but it was simple. So because we had a grid, we had a pattern, and so the bottom numbers were we just made a grid reference for it. So our ALD worked it out, and so you've traced it down here. Okay, it's here and here. That's that number.
Right.
And so then, Stratford is well supported with an ASM team. So then, and they were on a special. So no, it's not that one. It's the one over. So then, okay, no, it's 1 pixel. And so that was just the number over.
So, but like, I can understand how you're saying, it was relatively simple how it was all played out, except that how many DMX channels were you using for the floor that the audience never saw?
Oh, well, no.
And I'm not questioning whether or not you should do it. I'm saying that I just think it's amazing.
About 6,000. But that was just the functional part. That was just to get the scenery onto the exact right position.
Right.
Because then we also pixel mapped it, and it became part of the scenic element.
Oh, okay, right.
Because it also became the grass.
Right.
So it also became texture, because in the console, you could also put media on it. And so the media on the floor, this was the other nice thing about the way that we programmed it, was whatever was on the backdrop, because the backdrop, by the way, also had pixels.
Of course it did. Yep.
It could be an entirely scenic element that could carry over onto the floor.
Right.
And it was used very sparingly, and it was artfully done. Bretta had a vision in mind, and she and Jill were very clear on what it was to look like, and so we followed that very carefully. It was spectacular. Anyway, that was. But that's my point about that was programmers. We had a stage manager at one point said, "Who are all these electricians, and why are they all here?" And I had an electrician who was troubleshooting. So they were troubleshooting practicals. Right. I had an electrician on a console backstage. I had an electrician on a console at Midhouse. I had a floating programmer who could go through and making sure. And I had a console operator in the booth. Right. So that's 5. Anybody who could, that's a lot of programmers.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a lot. I mean, in a big Broadway show where they have a huge, massive budget that they're going to roll it, yeah, that might happen. That never happens in Stratford.
Right.
But I turned to, and I think actually I was the 6th because I wasn't assigned anything because I was working on another show.
Right.
And I turned to the stage manager and I said, "Yeah, that seems about right." It's big. We were building a lot of cues. We were building a lot, and it was only for one afternoon.
Right.
I mean, this is the same show that had an entire universe of DMX in a single horse. Right?
Yes, the horse.
Yeah.
So
should probably move on.
Fair enough. We could go on for hours. So, you brought up something about the subtlety of it, right, and how it was just used just enough. Mm-hmm. You've seen lots of shows, whether it's at Stratford or other places. You've been involved with a lot of different shows. Do you ever find yourself in a spot where you see something happening? And I want to be careful how I don't want to put you into a spot on this, but do you ever find yourself in a spot where you need to say to a designer, "You know what? I know the way that this venue works. I know the way that this equipment works. I know, and say, I think maybe we just need to kind of tweak this," or do you not really have that option? I'm not really saying, I guess, tweaking the design as much as just.
I understand. Yeah, not with the visual elements of design. But one thing I will jump right on is usually with atmospherics.
Oh, okay.
I tried very hard because that comes under our department. When a designer is, because that's usually the one where we do try to sort of help with that.
Okay.
I say often to designers, can we run the hazers or whatever until it looks the way you want it to look? And I pop my phone out and I try to take a picture of it and I try to really get a sense, because tell me what you're looking for. Tell me how much you're trying to get it to see the beams streaming through.
Right.
Because then basically let us take care of that.
Right. That makes sense.
Because often the designers say, "Let's move the machine, let's do this, let's move this around, let's do this," and they try to be very heavy-handed about it. And that we've done this an awful lot. And it's not that we ever will say, "No, we won't do that. No, we don't want to do that." It's just that we know very much that tomorrow or next week the humidity is going to change and it's all going to change.
Right.
And so this is the live theater aspect of, okay, tell us what you're going for, so that we can try to keep that as consistent as we can. And we succeed more than we fail.
Right.
But that's the one that I would say that's probably the only thing that I would say that we would jump in on, to say, tell us what you're going for.
Right.
Yeah, and then it's hard because to the point about extra crew, there's always somebody else. It's not just my eyes. My alternate, who sometimes can be sitting in the chair more than I am.
Right.
They have to be able to recognize the look as well. So, especially for a musical, they need to know what it's supposed to look like.
Right.
So.
No, that's interesting. Yeah. So you need to be able to work together, but you need to give them the lead as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to something like fog and haze and low smoke, that kind of thing, you have to make sure that you're giving them the information, because I mean you are the professional who lives in that venue all the time. So
yeah, and often the designer's reacting to what the director asked for.
Right.
And maybe they've had a conversation that we've not been privy to.
Right.
And that's cool. Right. Like. Yeah.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned fog machines and atmospherics. I think the one and only time that you and I worked on a show together, you were designing, I was on the console, and it wasn't it 4 fog machines, one in each corner of the room, and trying to deal with low smoke there.
We probably were moving fog around.
Yeah. That took a lot of work trying to get that right.
Yeah.
Earlier on, when we were talking, you mentioned that you're considered to be the electrician. You're the head electrician at the Avon. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people would say, well, that must mean that you deal with lights. But the reality is that these days it's not just lights, right?
Correct.
So
video falls under the banner of electrics at the Avon, and so there's still, I mean, by no means am I doing all of that. There's still people assigned into these jobs. There's people that are heading it. There's no way I don't touch the video programming at all.
Right.
I'm knowledgeable of, but not the expert on it. And now the complexity of the systems are huge. They work together, but they're not the same. We don't even fire video cues anymore.
Right.
It's just the complexity is just exploded, and that's it's where we are now. And our second venue has gone to that same video system with the Tom Patterson, and it's just leaps and bounds. What we can do with that now, and the way we can sculpt with video, and it's revolutionary.
Well, and I was on stage back a couple of months ago and talking to a few people about some pieces of equipment, and it's interesting because in the past there's always been this conversation about how video integrated into lighting and those things work together. And as you said, a lot of lighting cues were triggering video. But then we were watching demos on stage of how the video system was triggering lighting and controlling your moving lights, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, we've done all manner of beasts now.
Right.
And I think that's the way forward. We need to be aware of how all things can talk to each other, because really now what it's about is like Coriolanus was the show that pushed us forward on that, really. Where what's the lead element? Because particular Coriolanus, that was the bed track of audio was originally embedded in the video, and then eventually to make it sound the way that it needed to sound, the audio was pulled out, but then triggers were left embedded.
Right.
And then we had the car sequence where then the visual cues of the lightning were lighting cues responding to the video cues.
Right.
So now all of a sudden you've got all 3 elements combined, led by video. So that's just bed track. And that, that's just the way the technology goes. It's what needs to be. But the rest of the cues in that show weren't driven by video, nor lighting or sound. They were, you need to just follow it through what's logical.
Right.
I think it's a complete mistake to say that lighting is going to drive this. I think it's a complete mistake to say video is going to drive this.
Right.
And same thing with sound.
Right.
I think what's accurate is you need to take a look at what does the production need, and be prepared for, thunder and lightning are obvious.
Sure.
You're going to have some sort of connection.
Sure.
That's what makes a good deal of sense to me.
Right.
And then just take, if it's a sequence with sound or a musical number, well, if there's click track in it, well, that's probably going to lay down to click track. Or again, back to Jesus Christ Superstar, there were visual elements that were timed and shown, that were the dancers were doing the exact same dance moves that the visual element in behind were doing. So that all had to be visually aligned. Well, that was all time code.
Right.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point in time, who makes those decisions? Because you've got an audio designer, lighting designer, video designer, you've got the director, you've got the TD. Who of those people do you guys get to decide who's going to trigger what, or who's making that decision?
No, usually someone on the design team. Okay. Usually, so in the case of Jesus Christ Superstar, early on it was the video designer.
Okay.
And that's something that always needs to be discussed. So it does, as a technician and as someone who's responding to this, we always just need to be ready. Time code is one of those things. You need to be ready on how you can go both directions at all times.
Right.
And that's the way we're trying to be ready.
Right.
And now luckily there've been updates to all the system softwares where we can broadcast in all directions at all times. That's been a huge improvement.
Right.
And keeping the networks robust. Coriolanus, there were times, there were very few lighting cues in Coriolanus.
Right.
And there were times when a particular sequence would come up with the automation and the video. And there was this sort of shift. It was how it was staged, and it was how the visual worked. And I would realize I've stopped breathing. I was transfixed. I caught up in the story, and I don't have any lighting cues in here, thank goodness. But yeah, that happened a lot with that show. There were moments where you were captured as the scenic elements of the that show. I just watched it again the other day on video, and it distanced a little bit. But when you were in the theater, the framing mechanism really did drive your eye, and it drove the story, and it made you listen. And so I think that's probably that's right up there.
I remember watching that show and completely forgetting I was in a theater.
Yeah.
You start to question whether or not you're watching television or you're watching a theater performance, and then when you do come back to realize no, this is a live performance, then you start to think this is crazy. Like, what's going on here is spectacular.
We had a number of people ask us whether all the characters were real. Were they real actors, or were some of them on film?
Right.
And I think that was a success, because that wasn't an insult, because that was such a good use of the technology, and I didn't take that as a slight in any way, or the technology taking over the production.
No.
It was, you were mesmerized. That's a tough play.
Sure.
It's a tough. I remember reading it, forever ago when in school, and I was okay, but yeah, I was on the edge of my seat a lot.
That's great. Yeah. That's cool. Well, I know that I've always appreciated the opportunity to work with you, Greg, and I think we will continue to be able to do some neat stuff. And I really appreciate you taking this time today, because it's great to hear. You and I get to talk about stuff all the time, and we get to kick things back and forth, but it's cool to be able to share some of these things with other people. So thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And some of the people that you've mentioned today are definitely on the list of people, even though you may not have mentioned them all by name, they're definitely on the list of people that I'd like to talk to at some point in time with this. So thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Not every theatre requires the same level of planning and detail that the Stratford Festival theatres aim for on every production. There are a number of factors that demand a world-class pursuit of excellence there. Greg and the entire team at the Avon focus on excellence on a daily basis while working under the pressure brought on by professional rep theatre. But they do so with class and respect, and they have a lot of fun along the way. If you would like to know more about the Stratford Festival theatres, you can find them at stratfordfestival.ca. If you're interested in more information on the IATSE crew that works behind the scenes on every Stratford performance, you can find them at iatse357.ca. You can find more Resource Stage Conversations at resourcestage.ca. Resource Stage Conversations is a production of Horizon Solutions. Horizon Solutions has the privilege to work with professional and amateur theatres as well as schools across Canada to provide technical solutions to live performance and now more than ever, live streaming. You can find us at horizonsolutions.net. If you have any questions or suggestions of someone you think we should talk to, please email us at conversations@resourcestage.ca. I'm Carl Lukings. Thanks for joining us for Resource Stage Conversations.